I always believed I was a good person. I'm not a saint by any means, but I go to church, volunteer at a soup kitchen on the weekends, and try to be a nice and polite person to everyone I interact with. While I don't inherently believe in everything in the gospel, I appreciate the messages and lessons taught about forgiveness, love, compassion, mercy, and grace. I suppose I would technically be agnostic. Maybe my job as a scientist, pharmaceutical chemist to be specific, kept me from being able to blindly believe. I'm not sure. But the idea of an afterlife based on how you act while you were alive always fascinated me. That's why when the company I work for, unnamed for privacy reasons, started research on a new experimental drug that could give you a peek into the afterlife, I was beyond intrigued. And I was to be the lead researcher on the project. I was a bit disappointed I wasn't involved with the initial phase, but apparently the project was very hush-hush until a compound could be synthesized. It must have been in the works for several years up until that point. Typically, the discovery and development phase for new medications can last anywhere from 3 to 6 years, and that's with everything going right. The drug in question was a compound of zolpidem, Ambien, propranolol, a beta blocker used to reduce heart rate, and another drug that was classified even to me. The desired effect was to put whoever is taking the drug in a temporary, death-like sleep, to slow down the heart and mind enough to get a glimpse of the afterlife. That was the idea behind it at least, which is why the drug prototype was referred to as a glimpse. My personal vote was for Sleeping Beauty, but copyright and all that. To those who are familiar with the 2 medications within the compound I named, you may know that they tend to have mild to moderate drug interactions. Apparently, the classified portion of the compound was supposed to nullify the majority of those potential unwanted side effects as well as intensify the effects of the beta blocker and Ambien, to synergize them in a way. My job at that particular phase in the project was simple: animal testing. Approximately 75% of all medicinal animal testing is done on mice. Mice share about 95 to 98% of their genes with humans. This high degree of genetic similarity makes them excellent models for studying human diseases, genetics, and drug responses. We can also observe effects across generations in shorter time periods. I was working with a treatment group and a control group. The 10 healthy mice in each group had been bred to be sterile. This was to prevent reproduction, at least in this phase of testing, and still allow the subjects to be together to observe group behavior. Later tests would be scheduled to check impact on reproduction and subsequent offspring. Glimpse, like many other medications, was administered orally as a tablet. It was compounded down to an appropriate dosage, and the initial ingestion went without incident. After nearly half an hour, the mice in the treatment group started acting sluggish and eventually fell asleep. Since the heart rate and breathing would be drastically slowed, there were infrared thermometers set up around the cages to monitor the subjects' body temps. If one of them died, their body temp would begin to drop. However, as their breathing slowed and stilled, their temps remained the same. Another half an hour passed. Nothing much of note happened. Body temps were stable. There were no signs of distress or aspiration. But looking at the subjects, they definitely looked dead to me. I continued to study them until I noticed a small movement. If I hadn't been studying them so closely, I wouldn't have noticed. Their eyes were moving around under their eyelids like they were in a particularly active REM sleep. The rapid movement of their closed eyes was the only movement from them at all. No twitching or squeaks like mice sometimes have when dreaming. The thermometer's monitors beeped, alerting me. I thought for a moment maybe one of them had died, but that wasn't the case. The subject's temps were beginning to rise. Not drastically, but gradually, decimal point by decimal point. a slow crawl upwards. As soon as their temps started to reach into a feverish range, the subjects woke up. A horrible squeal from them filled the air. All of them screamed at once with shrill shrieks that blended together. I clasped my hands over my ears, but by the time I did, the subjects were quiet. I looked back at the cage only to see them acting normally, as if they hadn't just screamed. Their posture and cognition seemed normal. Some moved around their cage to drink water or eat food. I did a few tests to check their senses. Vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste were all within standard ranges. I won't go through all the different testing I did because that would take a long time and be a boring read. I did notice something interesting, however. People who have owned mice will know that they all have their own personalities. Like dogs or cats or horses, some tend to act a certain way. Subject 67A of the treatment group was documented to be a tad more aggressive than the others, especially to other males, being food aggressive and tending to get seemingly jealous of when other mice received rewards or treats. As I observed the group, I noticed Subject 67A was acting differently. Mice will often groom each other as a sign of affection, something Subject 67A rarely did. Now it was grooming one of the smaller males. I found this fascinating. I spent a long time observing the group. While Subject 67A's actions stood out to me the most at first, I realized that the other subjects were also acting more affectionately with each other, cuddling, sharing food, playing. New groups formed from mice unfamiliar with each other previously didn't tend to be this friendly, usually indifferent in most cases, and they definitely weren't acting like this earlier. The following days are spent doing tests to check the subject's health. Blood tests returned normal. Many tests were done checking cognition and responsiveness, all standard. One of the subjects was even euthanized and dissected. The findings there were also within normal range. The only difference that was found besides the increased level of affection was a new reaction to darkness. Mice tend to have poor vision in the dark, but a fearfulness of it isn't typical. When the lights are turned off at night, nearly every member of the treatment group would panic, scurrying around making distressed squeaks and urinating on themselves. It wasn't until the lights were turned back on did the panic stop. The cause of this reaction was unknown. It was decided that a small light would remain on at all times until further notice. Thankfully, it didn't seem to affect their circadian rhythm much. Truly, it was an interesting psychological side effect, and it was unknown if this would affect people in the same way. The days went on. Besides the sudden onset of nyctophobia in the subject, they otherwise seemed content. They kept up the affection for each other, and even the affection they showed to me and other researchers increased, chittering often, relaxed body language when handled, and even licking my nitrile-gloved hands. Though I've never had a soft spot for rodents with the necessities of my work, their actions, while normally indicative of happiness, felt more like relief. It's hard to explain where that thought comes from, but it's still there. It feels instinctual. Then again, that's not an objective truth, so I left that observation out of my notes. Another week goes by and more test groups are introduced, testing out various dosages within the limits safe for their body weight. There was a point where the compound didn't affect them enough to put them to sleep, only made them lethargic for a few hours. These subjects didn't present the nyctophobia the others did or have similar changes in displays of affection. The greater the dosage, it seems, the more severe the fear. There was a decision made by the higher-ups to isolate a couple of the mice from the first series of testing and keep them in a dark room. Their panic was wild, squeaking desperately and scurrying around. Eventually, each of them tired themselves out and had gone unconscious. They were returned back to their group, but nothing of note occurred after that. A new group was given a moderate dosage, this time instead of the mice that were bred to be sterile and not have a heat cycle. A group of 2 non-spayed females and 2 fixed males were placed together. This would allow for a regular expression of mating. The group of 4 were given what we found to be the optimal dosage of the compound. Like the others, they became unconscious, woke up with a scream, and then displayed the typical increased levels of affection and nyctophobia. However, this group of fixed male and unfixed female subjects displayed a new type of behavior. If you know anything about mice, you know that they can repopulate quite quickly. This is almost entirely due to the female mouse's short heat cycle, typically taking 4 days to fully complete. The female is usually in heat for 12 hours of those 4 days. This is the window mice would typically mate during. Despite mice not being a species known to mate for pleasure, this group of mice were doing exactly that. Between the grooming and similar signs of affection, the mice would often mate multiple times a day every day. This was extremely strange. I ordered another similar group be put into the same testing, making sure it's not an anomaly and is replicated through the same testing. The second group was the same. The way they mated, it wasn't the quick affair that mice typically took part in. The mating pairs, while not particularly exclusive to one another, would often spend a great deal of time together grooming or sleeping together. Something in the back of my mind was nagging at me again. It's a distraction. They're distracting themselves. It was such an instinctual thought, like I knew it for a fact, intrinsically, like the searing pain that accompanies a burn. The thought danced in my mind the rest of the day. Testing continued. I was in charge of initial testing of the compound. The groups of mice that had consumed the compound were sent to another section of the facility to do further testing, checking how much and how often the mice could take the compound without negative effects. I, on the other hand, began the next level of testing with primates. Unknown to some, primate testing is generally saved for medicine that would be considered psychoactive, which the glimpse compound technically was. Primates are particularly useful in the way that they can communicate. Some species can even learn and grasp human communication through sign language. P07 was a female primate, belonging to the species that's a distant relative of the chimpanzee family. Primates known for their ability to communicate. For legal reasons, I'm not allowed to give much more detail than that. The administration of the compound went well. The dosage was adjusted to P07's body weight. Shortly after the tablet was consumed, I kept P07 entertained with toys and occasionally asked her questions. Conversations with P07 through sign language will be recorded here. Me: "Hi Lucy, how do you feel?" P07: "Sleepy, I take nap." Me: "Good, take a nap, we can play when you wake up." P07 fell asleep a few minutes after. The amount of time the subject stays unconscious was longer than the mice test subjects by about 25%. The same REM cycle occurred with the subject's body completely still, except for her eyes dancing behind her eyelids. Body temperature rose throughout the process. P07 awoke just before her temp would enter a range that would be considered feverish. The subject jolted awake. The scream of a monkey is much louder, more shrill and ear-piercing than the mice could ever make. The subject seems to calm down after a minute, looking around, confused. I gently tap on the glass of the cage to get P07's attention. Me: "Good morning, Lucy, how are you?" P07: "Dark, scared." Me: "It's okay, you're safe now." P07 seems to visibly relax, and then as if nothing had happened at all, the subject goes back to playing with a set of large building blocks. I had hoped that there would be something more. So I started another conversation. Me. Lucy, did you have a bad dream? P07, dream. The subject carefully recreated the sign for dream in a questioning manner. I nodded. Yes, a dream is when you sleep and see things. The subject seems to ignore me for a few minutes. She seems almost hesitant to communicate. P07, yes, dream. Dream dark, scary. Felt. The subject pauses, trying to find the right words. Gone, Lucy gone, now Lucy back, don't understand, doctor why? I pause, trying to even imagine the answer or how to interpret the subject's question. Was she asking why she had gone, why she was back, or something else? Me. I don't know, I'm learning why. The subject didn't seem as bothered by the whole situation as I did. Over the next few hours, P07 seems to either forget or entirely ignore her experience with the compound. Like the mice, P07 seemed more content than ever to simply play with her toys, eat and communicate with me. There wasn't much more from the subject's experience with her limited vocabulary. P07 also seemed to develop the same nyctophobia. Communication attempts during exposure to a dark room were unsuccessful. The testing continued. P07 wasn't exposed to another dosage of the compound, at least not until more results came back from the repeat exposure experiments with the mice test groups. When that time came, my heart sank to see one of the higher-ups deliver the news that all future testing with the compound would be discontinued, and that the project as a whole was being terminated, probably indefinitely. Turns out the classified medication that helped bind the Ambien and beat blocker together was causing acute liver failure after repeated exposure in the mice. Something you should know about the pharmaceutical industry is this: we never sell a single-dose medication. That is, we can't produce something that can only be taken safely once or twice. Damn it. The results of this were turning out so fascinating. Once all of the compound on site was destroyed, and all of my notes and the test findings were archived, I headed home holding a small tablet folded up in a piece of paper that I had managed to sneak away. I wanted to know. I needed to know. Luckily for me, it was Friday night. I wouldn't have to go back into work tomorrow in case there were any lingering effects. The tablet felt heavy on my tongue as I reached for the glass of water, swallowing it down. I waited. It didn't take long for me to feel tired, immensely tired, like I had lived a long life of endless heavy manual labor, and I was finally able to rest. My eyes all but closed on their own, and a deep sleep overtook me. I'm not sure how much time passed in that deep sleep, but my consciousness began bubbling back up to the surface. It was cold, so damned cold. That was all I could feel at first as I became aware of the void around me. Pure darkness, darker than black, less than nothing. It was a hungry, gaping maw that I saw no beginning or end to. But wait, where exactly did I feel cold? I tried flexing my fingers or toes, but there was nothing there. I had no body to move, no body to feel through. Yet the aching chill remained. It reminded me of when I was young and tried to build a snowman with no gloves. The frosty snow froze my hands, making my joints sting and ache. It was like that, but my entire being, whatever that was now. Each moment was agonizing, but even more painful was the nothingness. Not a sound or light or sensation aside from the cold. Like I had been jettisoned into the depths of space, devoid of any light, celestial or otherwise. I floated there for an immeasurable stretch of time. With nothing to go off of, not even my own breaths or heartbeat, time became unknowable. I tried thinking of other things, something to pass this inescapable eternity. Every thought that surfaced in my mind seemed to drift away. Where was I? How long have I been here? Would I die here? It was then that I realized, this is death. I am dead. There is nothing. With this realization, I wanted to cry out, to scream. I so desperately want to do anything to display my despair through my bodiless form. Then I felt it. I quickly sat up in bed, letting out a pained scream so long and loud that it hurt my own ears. The ringing in my eardrums was dizzying, but better than the silence I had left behind. I sat in bed for a long time, long enough for the sun to set. Panic set inside me as the room got dark. I thought perhaps I would develop the same nectophobia, but the shadows on the house, even in the dark, were so much lighter than the void. I relaxed a fraction as I began to understand. The test subjects were relieved. To them, this was all just a single bad experience, something to move on from, to distract themselves from and forget. They didn't understand that the hungry nothingness is what waits for them. It's what waits for me too. It's what waits for all of us. Life feels hollow now. The ever-looming threat of the void just on the horizon. I think it's too late for me, but I'm writing this as a warning. In case my work ever decides to revamp the project, never take any medication that promises a glimpse into the other side. You won't like what you see,